Hello and welcome to this Policy Watch special on skilling. It's a 400 million target by 2022. That's the number of jobs India needs to create. Now, there is a skilling crisis as well as an opportunity, but executing it will be tough, particularly in a slow economy. The big question is, what are the challenges ahead and how will India overcome them? That's the question we are asking, but before we do that, here's a report.
अगर चीन की पहचान दुनिया की मैन्युफैक्चरिंग फैक्ट्री की है, तो हिंदुस्तान की पहचान दुनिया की रिक्वायर्ड ह्यूमन रिसोर्स का कैपिटल बनने की बन सकती है। हमारे पास जो ताकत है, उस पर हमें बल देना है। हमें अपनी ताकत पर जितना हम जोर लगाएंगे, हम चीजों को उतना प्राप्त करेंगे।
कौशल भारत, कुशल भारत।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi launching the 1500 crore Skill India program on Wednesday, underscoring its potential and the need for India to become the HR capital of the world. He said the scheme is not merely to fill pockets, but to bring a sense of self-confidence among the poor. This, he said, is a war against poverty.
और ये गरीबी खिलाफ का जंग जीतने के लिए गरीब की ही मुझे फौज बनानी है। हर गरीब मेरा फौजी है, हर गरीब नौजवान मेरा फौजी है। उन्हीं की ताकत से, उन्हीं के बलबूते पर ये गरीबी के खिलाफ जंग जीत रहा है।
The Prime Minister also stressed upon the creation of structures and mechanisms to nurture youngsters, enabling them to find employment. His idea was endorsed by Finance Minister Arun Jaitley, who said India has a bright spot among the global economies.
Our services sector is almost going to touch a double-digit growth. Hopefully, with the kind of initiatives that we are pumping into the economy, from infrastructure to smart cities, to a lot of initiatives in agriculture, our manufacturing sector, with the Make in India initiative, is also going to pick up. From almost a flat manufacturing growth 14 months ago, signs of revival are almost visible.
Through the Skill India program, the Union government provides a skill card to the youth. This card can be used by employers to verify the skill training credentials obtained by any job seeker, lessening the burden of carrying bundles of certificates. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, joining me now is National Skills Development Agency and National Skills Development Corporation Chairman, Mr. S. Ramadorai. Mr. Ramadorai, thank you very much for joining us. So we've had an announcement of a World Youth Skills Day, many concurrent programs being launched. The question that's being asked at the end of all of this is, where are the jobs?
I think that's an excellent question. The 15th of July marked a watershed day in the history of the World Youth Skills Day across the world and of course in India. Coming from the top from our Prime Minister made it all the more important because that's the direction setting which is very, very important for every one of us to align together. The jobs are going to come from a number of areas. One is the services sector itself, where the supply and the demand mismatch has to be fixed through technology as a platform or as an intervention. Second is,
can you give us an example of how technology could help you?
For example, if I create a labor market information system, then all the people who are looking on the capabilities as a service provider which we have, let's say I'm a plumber, I'm an electrician or whatever it is, I log on to that and put my name with my credentials, including the competency level with which I can perform. You as probably a consumer of that service may say, I want to look at who are all the suppliers that are available in my area. So a real-time match, if it happens, immediately you know which jobs to be looking for or which jobs to be for.
So you're saying like a marketplace which brings buyers and sellers together more efficiently.
Absolutely. Okay. The efficiency and the information asymmetry has to be bridged.
Okay.
Second one is the manufacturing sector with the Make in India program and the FDI investments. If you look at what has happened in the last year, it's a very clear direction. Manufacturing is going to take some amount of job creation. A third is within that, of course, the infrastructure, whether it's the private sector or the public sector investments, new areas like renewables, all these are going to fuel a lot of jobs as we see it. The idea is to create a number of local jobs instead of en masse migration from rural to the urban. What are those local jobs at a village level, at a panchayat level, at a district level or at a state level that are going to be making sense for the youth? When we talk about drivers, we talk about shortages which are unbelievable. I think the driver certification with the driver training, with the kind of life skills and the soft skills, that's a demand which is unbelievable.
Right. But if I were to, focus on the driver as an example, the job is still being created already, and that driver is getting absorbed. Perhaps what the government is doing in this case is to make it a little more formal and maybe issue a certificate and so on. But I mean, what I'm trying to say is that the demand supply is already getting matched, isn't it? To the extent that there is.
No, it's not getting matched to the extent because the supply comes from Jharkhand, let us say, and the demand is in Karnataka. Unless we have a job creation in Jharkhand itself, we are going to have this migration which leads to other kind of issues.
Correct.
If you say that there are no training schools for driving in Bihar or Jharkhand as an example, why are we not setting up a training center there so that I can create a supply there? So I think one has to really use technology, but more importantly the marketplace, to match the supply versus demand. I'll give you another example that overseas jobs. People have gone to the Middle East and then looked at what are the kind of construction jobs that are required. So they tied up for about 4,000, 5,000 jobs. Then they come back and say that the supply of plumbers is going to come from this part of the country. So go and set up a training center there, so that immediately you match the supply to the demand that is already tied up. So I think we have to look at some of these things very, very effectively.
Right. So let me jump to the question which I may have come to otherwise a little later. Now, why is the government doing this? You talked about jobs in the Middle East and people going and, let's say, working as plumbers or carpenters or drivers. Why should the government or the taxpayer be funding this?
I don't think the government is funding or the taxpayer, the example I gave. It's an organization called the Pan IIT alumni who have set it up on their own. What the government gives is, for me, if for example an existing infrastructure of the government can be used, for example a school or a railway station or any other facility that they can offer, it's a collaborative model. Even if it is, for example, a land, if they give it to me on lease, I can just construct a temporary facility for training and skilling the people. So I think the role of the government, the role of the private sector and the role of the entrepreneur is going to be very critical. All of us have to work in collaboration to make it happen, to address the demands of the youth.
So let me ask the larger question again. So should the government be focused on supply or on demand?
I think the government should be focused on creating enablement for supply to take place very quickly. The government should be able to create certain PSU related, government related infrastructure development where the jobs from that demand should be created. But then the role has to be left to the marketplace for the private players and the market to determine what is the best for a particular youth.
Right. So the feeling again here is that the role of the market, since you mentioned it, is not really prominent, or is not, market forces are not being allowed to have their play, particularly when it comes to either giving skills to people in the form of training institutes or eventually trying to find jobs for them.
I think the marketplace through the private sector participation is happening in a couple of ways. One is very clearly adoption of ITIs by the private sector. And the Institute Management Committee, which is going to be managed, private sector participation is going to be a way of life. What they can do is define the curriculum, define the governance structure, and also the kind of courses that are going to be done through the training for the trainers themselves. Assessment and certification, namely the assessor certification itself plus certification of the youth, again it's a private sector play. Marketplace also determines through the private sector what are the jobs, and let's define those jobs. Ultimately, the 37 sector skill councils which have been defined through the National Skill Development Corporation, where a private sector participation of small, medium and large enterprises is what is the governing model for each SSC. They will define the job roles through the occupation standards and the qualification packs, in addition to the government NCVT and other schemes.
Right. And I'll come to NSDC in a moment. What's the progress on the marketplace?
I think the progress on the marketplace is today at least 206 private sector providers have been funded. Second is they have created a capacity across 3,000 training centers in the country, including about 800 mobile centers which are there. And the outcomes are going to be through the level of competency, where a qualification register is being created by the National Skill Development Agency. To me, we are all looking at a commonality of purpose with regard to the outcomes which are based on the market demands as defined by the sector skill councils. The role of the government, you asked a minute ago, the rollout of the National Skills Qualification Framework and vocational education as part of the curriculum has to be introduced at the school level, at the secondary school. Whether it's a private school or a public school, That's what is going to drive towards people accepting this model of vocational education rather than purely a paper-based general education.
Okay, so I'll come to that in a moment, but let's talk about NSDC for a moment. So one of the criticisms is that NSDC has adopted a model, perhaps there was no other option at that point of time, which involves, let's say, giving loans to private training institutes who in turn skill people. But one is the money is not coming back, and secondly, the outcome, because maybe of a slowing economy, is not evident.
No, I think the NSDC was set up with a very, very clear purpose, that here is a private sector participation and a public sector participation. The initial funding came from the public sector, namely to create a seed fund of 1,000 crores plus. The reason that was put in was to create the market forces to come and align with this. And what has it resulted in? It has resulted in the kind of numbers I talked about, 206 service providers who have taken up this. The second is the contribution by the service providers themselves in addition to the loan given by the NSDC itself. That has to be quantified and that has to be talked about so that it's not just the government money, but the private sector is also putting in money. Third is the jobs that are being provided to these youths, which are being tracked now through the mechanisms, so that with the Aadhaar card or biometric identification or a financial inclusion through the bank accounts, etc., one can track for job completion or entrepreneurs that are being generated in this country. So I think the private sector will adopt, and now what is happening is with the CSR mandate and the Apprenticeship Act being simplified, corporates are coming in a big way, either doing the training and skilling themselves, not only for their requirement but also for the society's requirements, plus contributing to the National Skill Development Corporation's fund that has been created, so that we are making mechanisms where it is easier for the corporate sector to partner in a different way through money itself in addition to other things.
So how would you then judge the efficacy of the NSDC so far?
I think I would say that in terms of capacity building, it has done a good job. In terms of defining the occupational standards for 37 sector skill councils, I will do it very well. But in terms of job creation and ultimately tracking the jobs, it has some time to go.
Okay. And so the question really is, there were so much funds which were given, these funds have gone out. So is there a way of measuring whether it has delivered? Is it going to come back? Are the people who the money has been given to using it effectively?
Yeah, let me say that there are checks and balances to make sure that we can do a social audit of each of these. Independent organization and set up to look at the audit part of it, in addition to the compliance and reporting requirements of every single funded agency. The board reviews it. Even before a proposal is approved, it's a project approval committee as well as the appraisal ones which do, and they do a very, very good scrutiny because the people who are leading these are very eminent people from the industry itself. In addition to this, I think the repayment of the funded partners have been pretty good. What I would like to see improvement is, are they getting 70% plus employment based on the completion of the program? It's still about 55, 60, 65% in some cases, depending upon the provider and the sector they are in. This can be either linked to delay in delivery, one of the aspects, or it could be the demand side has not been judged properly, or the location of the center itself in certain cases maybe has to be relocated. But we are helping them to perform better. The maturity comes after the first year, second year or third year, but I don't think we have had, other than one or two defaults, anything of that kind.
Okay, so you've said you've had one or two defaults, but what could be the reason for those defaults?
The reason of default is they completely misjudged the market and they were not able to
on
generate the kind of, on the demand side.
Okay, but that could change, right? If the
that could change if the demand side, but that's why they have to restructure so that they'll have to say that you will default. When I say is, if a payment is due at the end of 6 months or 9 months or whatever it is, beyond the moratorium period, if it has not started, we consider it as a default.
Okay, but you're saying these companies are still in existence and they might well come back. So what are the lessons from the NSDC model so far? I mean, if we were to do this again, how would you do it differently?
I think I'll do it I will do a few things which in addition to what they are doing. The kind of demand side data I will re-verify continuously to make sure that at least jobs are available locally. Second thing is the supply side mobilization. I will make sure people are willing to fulfill that demand because that's the interest, or they are willing to move out of that location to say that if a welder needs a job and is willing to move out from his state to another location, we should be choosing such candidates. Third is the mobilization and certification and assessment agencies. I will look at assessment agencies for their code of conduct and making sure that they do the right kind of assessments, absolutely, which stands up the test of time. I will be able to link, if you are a youth who has got a job, can I locate from you the training provider that you went to, the assessment agency you went to, the assessor you went to, and how long you have been on the job, what is the kind of wage, and finally where is that center set up and what is the kind of mobilization effort that was done. Are you the right person for the right job, starting from the supply side to the demand side? That's what I will put systems for that.
This is a platform which is being built.
It's being built. Portions of this platform are already there, but tracking and reporting it transparently to tell a youth in Jharkhand, you have an aptitude for welding. Is it really the good thing to do because there is a job available? And if a job is available 100 miles away or 200 miles away, let us make it transparent to the youth. Yes, it is available, but it's available 100, 150 miles away. That's the importance of information available in real
So in some ways this comes back to the earlier question, right? So should it be controlled at a central level and then organized as maybe some other flagship programs, or should it be, you know, in a more devolved federated structure?
I think it will be cooperative federalism that has to be there. It has got to be devolved very clearly. The policy and the direction can be set from the top, but the implementation at the state level, at the district level, at the operating level has to be the key. So a bottom-up approach with regard to making sure the demand side is understood, mobilization of the supply from the bottom up has to happen, and then matching it through the platform like I said, and the training providers must understand it fully. I as a training provider must be absolutely clear when I set up a training center in a particular location. There is a reasonable chance every single youth coming out of my center, if I am good, must be placed.
Okay, we'll take a break on that, but I'll come back and ask you about aspirations. You know, skilling is a good objective, but does it meet the aspirations of today and tomorrow's youth? We take a break here on Policy Watch. We'll be back. We're speaking with S. Ramadorai, Chairman of the National Skills Development Agency and the National Skills Development Corporation. Stay with us. Welcome back to this Policy Watch special on skilling. I'm in conversation with S. Ramadorai, Chairman of the National Skills Development Agency and the National Skills Development Corporation. Mr. Ramadorai, before we went in, we talked about the NSDC, the fact that some of aspects of that model may not have worked and maybe you will do things differently. I'll come back to that in a way to wrap it up later. The bigger question in some ways that is being asked is, we've set a jobs target, 400 million jobs by 2022. It is ambitious. We of course have both demand and supply side challenges, and maybe the demand side challenge is bigger than the supply side challenge. But the question is, does such an objective mesh with the aspirations of young India, particularly future aspirations?
I think advocacy has to be the starting point, and which I already started through a number of ways. You can advocacy through public posters or whatever it is, advocacy through what we did on the 15th of July on the overall messaging by the Prime Minister of the country, followed by radio, television or any other forms of communication, social media, the net or whatever it is. We have to step up the communication to a level which becomes very, very visible beyond what we have done ever in the past. Second is,
so what would let me pose a couple of questions there. What would be the communication when someone who is, let's say, forced to become a driver in some ways, but is actually aspiring to become something else, maybe have a normal, you know, job in a factory or an organization?
A simple thing like that. I may be an IT professional, but I may have a passion for photography as an example. But I don't even know what can I do with the photography as a youth, let us say. So how do I invoke the passion to say that there is a possibility that if you took up photography as a hobby and ultimately as a profession, you can go it. We have seen it in music, for example. There are a lot of people who are working in the corporate sector. Suddenly after a certain number of years, they say that music is my passion. I want to check out the corporate job and get into music and then get skilled and then come back to the music as their primary discipline. So how do we create your passion and invoke and evoke your passion to say that this is what I am interested in, there are opportunities in that area? It is our responsibility very clearly. A lot of youth today are completely unaware of anything other than going to a school and then at the 8th grade or the 10th grade dropping it out because I can't cope up with the mathematics or I can't cope up with it. So the advocacy of a highest order through what we call as local place, look at as an example. I think how do you bring youth of these people together at the village level, at the district level, at the corporate level to say that let's ignite your passion through a set of messaging, through a set of communication, which makes it very, very important.
So one of the questions people keep asking is, you know, that most people, I mean, you know, a driver, for instance, does not want his son or his, son, I guess, in most cases, to become a driver, right? He would want his daughter to study and become an engineer or a doctor. So there seems to be a mismatch between skills and what they may empower and create to what people actually want to do, particularly for the next generation.
I think I look at it slightly different. If I come from a family of craftsmen, let us say, and there is inherent in my capability to do that craft. But then how do you make that design engineering of that craft with the modern tools, namely the information technology or the technology enablement? How do I connect a weaver, for example, to the market? How do I connect a weaver to an industrial designer or a design engineering fellows who specify the designs that are required in the marketplace? We have done some experiments, whether it's for the Varanasi weavers or the Kanjipuram weavers or from the Manipur or whatever it is, to make sure that the technology incorporation into that and their ability to pick up the technology is absolutely
But
phenomenal.
these are people who are already in some ways gifted or already are endowed with some skills and some talent, which you are in some ways building further and bringing them to a market,
That is
as you
one.
said. Yeah.
The second is, quite a few of us, namely the youth, don't even know what is it that excites me, what is that interests me. Unless I give you the opportunities to look at a menu of 100 things before I say this is what is interesting to you, it will be unfair to expect saying that you are fond of driving. If tomorrow your kid or my kid came and said that I want to be a fireman, we had to overcome that to say that fireman is not an end job. Fireman may be a starting job to ultimately going through a completely fire protection for a corporate building that is going to be built, which is one of the highest order of social engineering or engineering, so that people are not put to any problems when a fire really takes place. So I think we have to look at these and visualize these jobs through what is the kind of career path that you are looking at the end of the day, and does it really excite you, and there are pathways to go for the degree if you think that is the best way. So vocationalization of education through communication, opportunities within that vocational stream, adjacency within that vocational stream, and finally going to the general education if you want it. All these have to be connected together, make it happen, that it is what your passion is all about.
Right. So two questions now. So one is, how is this being rolled out? I mean, you've already alluded to it in some ways, but in a more operational sense, how is all this being rolled out, particularly the ambitious challenge? And secondly, and most importantly, how are we going to fund it?
I think the way it is going to be rolled out is, first is, let's start at the base level of advocacy. Let us start at the school level of including the curriculum, the National Skills Qualification Framework. The
so this still has to be done?
No, it has already started in a bunch of schools. What does that do is a number of
schools, you mean class 1 to 10, as in under?
No, class 9, 10, 11, 12.
Okay.
So the dropout at the 8 doesn't happen, and then you start introducing vocation, so that at the 9th, 10th completion they can enter the ITI stream. Or 9th, 10th, 11th,
and how
12th.
many schools is this?
I think they have got about 500, 600 schools which are there, and a number of states have also signed up. I think the important thing is vocational education introduction in the school level, make sure that the people that are interested follow that stream and go to ITIs. Second one is, how do you convert these ITIs into multi-skilling centers which have the modern tools and techniques? Example, simulators. Example, the faculty which uses technology, remote distance learning, self-learning on a tablet, an affordable device, etc. The third is certification and assessment, which gives you the credibility to say that I have a standing in the society with a certificate or a diploma. And then fourth is pathways to say that from a diploma I can go for a degree with the credits I can take. Collaborations with the Germans or the Swiss or the Austrians or the British or the US or whatever it is, to make sure that dual recognition of certificates is a way of life. All of these are in place. The whole idea is, how do you do it at a speed, how do you do it with a scale, and that's what one is attempting through some of these.
So you said 600 schools, so what is the target, the next level?
I think the target is, if I can get about 5,000 schools in this year, that will be of great help, because every state has to move in on that. The state skill missions have to drive this whole.
And these are all schools, both government run as well as non-government.
Absolutely, government as well.
But do the schools have a choice, or are they forced? Do they have to incorporate?
I think what we have said is, if they have to expect the funding from the government, they have to move over to this within a period of certain number of years, 2 years or 3 years, and then at the end of 5 years, no funding will come, whether it's public or private institution. More importantly, funding mechanisms can be self-generated by an incremental fee increase, as an example. State-funded funding, corporate-funded funding, or the center-funded funding. Corporate funding comes through the CSR route for sure. But so long as you make available open source and availability of a smartphone, we can overcome some of these challenges of cost. That's why common infrastructure, where you can use the infrastructure of the school itself after the school hours for vocational education, these are cost reduction exercises instead of spending on capital.
Right, so that's 5,000 schools that you've targeted by the end of this year. What about the colleges or the ITIs? I mean, they're there, but what is their ability to absorb? And also, what about training the trainers?
I think there are 12,000 ITIs, and ITIs, quite a few of them are functioning. Some of them are questionable because the demand may not be there near that ITI. or the faculty may not be there, or the curriculum may be completely outdated. The question that will be asked by the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship is, do these ITIs serving the purpose in terms of supplying for the demand, and then is the supply is the right one? That is where multiple things are going to be done, namely adoption of ITIs by the private sector, which has already happened for a while, and then how do you scale it up? Multi-skilling centers, convert these ITIs into multi-skilling centers and create a platform for supply versus demand match so that the jobs are matched to the skills that come out. Newer areas of curriculum, whether it is through the sector skill councils or the NCVT curriculum, that's also being introduced. And finally, the multi-skilling centers or the skills universities or the community colleges that we have. I think an ecosystem of a sort after 60, 70 years, just the journey has started in the last 4 or 5 years or 6 years. That's going to take some time before it really ramps up and this becomes aspirational.
Right. So last question, Mr. Ramadorai. So all of this is adding up to something. Now, when do you start seeing visible impact of this specific effort, apart from, let's say, the overall outcome of an economy that's maybe accelerating in GDP? And
I think if you ask, let's say 1 year from today, can we track every single job that was created? Can we track every entrepreneur? That's the direction we are going. Will we be able to do in all the 206 centers or 206 plus centers, plus all the government schemes which may be happening through the ITIs and the portions of the labor market information system and the school rollout which we talked about through the NSQF, we should be able to disseminate quite a bit of this in real time to make sure people are aware of what's really happening on the ground. One of the tasks as chairman of NSDC, NSDA, along with the ministry, what we are trying to push is transparency and dissemination of information on implementation rather than on the policy. So implementation has to be very visible, as you rightly asked the question.
Okay. And tracked.
Yes.
Tracked. Right. On that note, Mr. Ramadorai, ambitious project, ambitious objectives. Hopefully, we'll see the outcome of this in coming years. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's all we have time for on this Policy Watch special. We'll be back next week, same time. Thanks for watching.